Hello, fellow students. My name is Lionel Taylor. I am a history PhD student with Liberty University, and I'm also a high school teacher, social studies teacher, with 23 years of experience. My primary interest is in the history of the American South. For my research topic, I chose the captivity of German prisoners of war during World War II in the camps that they were kept in, located primarily in Georgia. There were camps located in Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, and several other states, but they were focused primarily here in the South. And the question I ask is, how did the treatment of these soldiers and the way they were used in local industries reflect broader issues in society at the time? Now, for sources, I had a variety of sources to use from, everything from the letters and accounts after the war of the soldiers themselves, of their recollections and experiences in the camps, letters written by soldiers themselves home and to newspapers about their interactions with German prisoners of war, and even the recollections of people in my hometown of Monticello, Georgia, who remember interacting with some of these prisoners who were at a camp here in this county working in the peach orchards here in Jasper County, Georgia. In addition to that, there were several government sources, official military records on inspections of these camps, the day-to-day functioning acquisitions of the camps available in the government archives, both online and at the state archives building in Atlanta. Through examining all of these different sources and the different interactions of these prisoners, what I noticed were several patterns, how they were integrated into the local labor market in the communities that they lived in due to the shortages of labor during this time, and also how they were perceived by the local civilian population, as well as the military population that was guarding them. One interesting perspective was the racial dynamic at this time. Of course, the U.S. was still a very segregated society, and the military was also segregated. And while Jim Crow existed in the military, there were lots of African American soldiers that were put in charge of guarding these German prisoners. It was also interesting to research or see the German soldiers' perspective on what they saw in this country. Many of these soldiers decided to come back over here after the war and apply for U.S. citizenship. And they brought a unique perspective to a society that they were not familiar with. From the American side, most Americans had not had direct contact with any of the people of the nations that we were at war with. And it was interesting to read their preconceived notions as opposed to what they actually encountered. So that was interesting. And you could also see the tensions within both the labor market with the native workers who had to work alongside these prisoners of war, and also the employers who had to employ them and demanded their labor. So there were several dynamics in the research, and all of this came out. I was also able to compare this to previous prisoners of war during World War I at a camp that was located in Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, located in northwest Georgia. During that war, where the prisoners actually kept a camp newsletter, and to compare that to the World War II era camps, the differences and similarities between those two time periods. Now, my conclusions in this were that a lot of the issues that would arise in the post war period, the Cold War, the Civil Rights Movement, you could see early indicators of these movements rising during this period. For example, a lot of the racial dynamics that would come to the head in American history, come to the forefront in American history in the 50s and 60s, were becoming evident during this time period. And you can see this in the letters that Black soldiers are writing to the Black press because they were often ignored in the mainstream press, and also the letters in memoirs of the German soldiers and what they saw, and also the government memos dealing with the treatment and handling of these soldiers. And you can see the tension that existed that would eventually come to a head after the war. There is also an interesting contrast in how the U.S. treated its prisoners of war as opposed to the other Allied powers, especially Russia. And why did the U.S. treat their prisoners in such a way that some of them wanted to come back and live here later on? Now, I feel that as I pursued this topic, I was only scraping the very tip of the iceberg, and there are so many other questions. For example, what were the experiences of Italian prisoners of war and Japanese prisoners of war? So this was a fascinating topic that is open to all sorts of other avenues of research, and I found it extremely interesting. And I see this as a topic I can pursue in my dissertation research.